Chapter 5, Section 2, Limits to Growth. Now that you know a few things about population growth, think again about the sea otter's example in the beginning of the previous section. When a sea otter population declines, something has changed the relationship between the birth rate and the death rate, or between the rates of immigration and emigration. For instance, in part of the sea otter range, the death rate of the sea otter is increasing because killer whales are eating the otters. Predation by killer whales creates a situation that reduces the growth of the sea otter population. Limiting factors. Recall from Chapter 3 that the primary productivity of an ecosystem can be reduced when there is an insufficient supply of a particular nutrient. Ecologists call such substances limiting nutrients. A limiting nutrient is an example of a more general ecological concept, a limiting factor. In the context of a population, a limiting factor is a factor that causes population growth to decrease. Some of the limiting factors that can affect a population are shown in Figure 5-5. Competition, predation, parasitism and disease, drought and other climate extremes, and human disturbances. A resource base that is limited can also affect the long-term survival of a species. As shown in Figure 5-6, pandas depend for food on bamboo that grows in certain kinds of temperate forests in China. Since the time that these forests have been cleared for timber and farmland, panda populations have fallen dramatically and have become isolated in small pockets of remaining forest. Density-dependent factors. A limiting factor that depends on population size is called a density-dependent limiting factor. Density-dependent factors become limiting only when the population density, the number of organisms per unit area, reaches a certain level. These factors operate most strongly when a population is large and dense. They do not affect small, scattered populations as greatly. Density-dependent limiting factors include competition, predation, parasitism, and disease. Competition. When populations become crowded, organisms compete with one another for food, water, space, sunlight, and other essentials. For example, puffins must compete for limited nesting sites. Competition among members of the same species is a density-dependent limiting factor. The more individuals living in an area, the sooner they use up the available resources. Likewise, the fewer the number of individuals, the more resources are available to them and the less they must compete with one another. Competition can also occur between members of different species. This type of competition is a major force behind evolutionary change. When two species compete for the same resource, both species are under pressure to change in ways that decrease their competition. Over time, the species may evolve to occupy separate niches. That is, because as you may recall, no two species can occupy the same niche in the same place at the same time. Predation. Populations in nature are often controlled by predation. The regulation of a population by predation takes place within a predator-prey relationship. One of the best known mechanisms of population control, the relationship between sea otters and sea urchins and between sea otters and killer whales, are examples of predator-prey interactions that affect population growth. A well-documented example of a predator-prey relationship is the interaction between wolves and moose on Isle Royale, an island in Lake Superior. The graph in Figure 5-7 shows how periodic increases in the moose population, the prey, on the Isle Royale are quickly followed by increases in the wolf population. The predators, as the wolves prey on the moose population falls. The decline in the moose population is followed sooner or later by a decline in the wolf population because there is less for the wolves to feed upon. A decline in the wolf population means that the moose have fewer enemies. So the moose population rises again. This cycle of predator and prey population can be repeated indefinitely. Parasitism and disease. Parasites can also limit the growth of a population. Parasitic organisms range in size from microscopic, disease-causing bacteria to tapeworms 30 centimeters or more in length. These organisms are similar to predators in many ways. Like predators, parasites take nourishment at the expense of their host, often weakening them and causing disease or death. The wasp cocoon in Figure 5-8, for example, can weaken or kill many caterpillars. Density-independent factors. Density-independent limiting factors affect all populations in similar ways, regardless of the population size. Unusual weather, natural disasters, seasonal cycles, and certain human activities, such as damming rivers and clear-cutting forests, are all examples of density-independent limiting factors. In response to such factors, many species show a characteristic crash in population size. After the crash, the population may soon build up again, or it may stay low for some time. For some species, storms or hurricanes can nearly extinguish a population. For example, thrips, aphids, and other insects that feed on plant buds and leaves might be washed out by a heavy rainstorm. Extremes of cold or hot weather also can take their toll on a population, regardless of the population's density. A severe winter frost, for example, can kill giant saguaro cactuses in the Arizona desert. In some areas, periodic droughts can affect entire populations of vegetation, as shown in Figure 5-9. Such events can, in turn, affect the population to consumers within the food web. Environments are always changing, and most populations can adapt to a certain amount of change. Populations often grow and shrink in response to such changes. Major upsets in the ecosystem, however, can lead to long-term declines in certain populations. Human activities have caused some of these major upsets, as you will soon read.